This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Visit Progressive.com to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary, not available in all states or situations.
Welcome back, folks. If you're just tuning in, this is the Roger Stone Show on the Red Apple Audio Network. Joining me now is Arnie Steinberg. He is a contributing editor to The American Spectator. He's the author of a great book, Whiplash, From JFK to Donald Trump. He is, to my mind, one of the most brilliant and I think creative strategic thinkers in the Republican Party. He knows New York State well, having been one of the principal architects of James L. Buckley's 1970 election to the U.S. Senate as a minor party candidate, which has happened very, very seldom in our American history. And he has written an incredible piece for The Spectator, which is in the form of a memo to President Donald Trump with advice before this upcoming debate. Now, I think this debate is going to be positively crucial in this race. That's not always the case, but this is going to be as important as the 1960 debate between Richard Nixon and John F. Kennedy was, as important as the debate between President Jimmy Carter and then Governor Ronald Reagan was. Arnie Steinberg, thank you so much for joining us on the Roger Stone Show.
Thank you, Roger. In full disclosure, you and I go back over a half century of that 1970 Buckley campaign and subsequently. And I think there's a few people that know Donald Trump better than you personally, having some insight. So I think we've got kind of interesting combination for a dialogue here today.
Well, I'm delighted to have you. This debate, as you said to me off air, is going to be vitally important. So let's lay this out. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I think it's going to be important for two reasons. One is the sort of the substantive one, the perception one. And as you and I know from debates, what's often as important or more important than a debate is the pickup, what the headline is, what people see who don't watch the debate and they see 30-second clip or whatever. And that's what President Trump has to bear in mind. You mentioned Kennedy-Nixon. People should understand, especially the younger people who weren't around, is that Kennedy won the debate on television, Nixon won the debate on radio. And that shows that, as Arthur Finkelstein, an old friend of ours who's passed away, once said, perception is reality. And so what is the perception that people are going to have about this debate? The technical reason why it's important is because of COVID, we started this early voting trend, which is continuing there. And so people are going to start voting very early. And so to the extent that this debate affects them, to state the obvious, somebody who votes early has a voter propensity, a voter probability of 100%. And, you know, one of the challenges of polling is that when I did a lot of polling before I left doing that work professionally, we used to account for people who already had voted. We would ask them questions, and we would have a mathematical way of figuring them in, because the people who have voted, as I said, are going to, in effect, be certain voters there. So as you get closer and closer to election, it becomes more and more important how many people already have voted versus how many people are left for grabs. So those are the two principal reasons. And looking at this debate, we have the situation where most people advise a candidate, be yourself. I watched the Reagan movie last night, and Nancy Reagan stopped the briefing of Ronald Reagan debating, and they said, you're just giving a bunch of numbers. Let him just be himself. And so here, you want Donald Trump to be himself. You want him to be authentic, and yet you want him to do what works. And what is the constituency? What is the target group? Well, we know his base is motivated, and we know her base is motivated. So this is not a guy who has to crank out his people to turn out to vote because the election is important. He has to concentrate on those states that are going to determine the electoral vote, which will be dispositive in the election, and probably a bit of an expanded number than the usual, but basically the battleground states. So even though it's a national audience, he has to speak to those states. And who are the voters that are going to determine that? It's going to be the voters who are declined to stay independent, or the squishy Democrats who might switch, or the squishy Republicans who need to come back to the fold. And my contention is that what reaches the independent voters will reach the squishy Dems and the squishy REITs. And basically, I think you have technical reasons as to why the former president needs to be effective, and you have the substantive reasons. The technical reasons are age-old and apply to every debate in the last 10, 20, 30, 40, or 50 years, which is he should be prepared for every possible attack against him. There should be no surprises there. So he doesn't have to be briefed on a bunch of numbers and statistics that are going to overwhelm him there. But there are so many possible attacks against him that could be disposed of in one or two sentences without a dialogue. He loses when he has a dialogue on his perceived negatives there. He wins when he has a dialogue on her perceived negatives and expands on them. So I think that's very, very important. It really bothers me when I see a candidate who I support in a debate and express surprise and amazement and suddenly floored by some obvious attack against him. So let's just say the most obvious ones would be the ones that are recent. Tucker Carlson had a controversial guest that said some things about Churchill and World War II and so on. That might be asked about how he feels there. So he has to be prepared for a 1 or 2 sentence reply to dispose of it. So that's an area. Second, he should understand that it isn't any specific Kamala position that's at issue, although some are very compelling against her. It's the idea of credibility and trust. And so he needs to take the low-hanging fruit on what she's most vulnerable on. For example, that in the last CNN interview, in fact, the only interview she's done since she was nominated, she said that her position on fracking was made clear in a 2020 debate that she supported it. Flatly untrue, and the CNN fact checker actually said that. So he needs to bring that up, and then he needs to ask her questions generally that she can't possibly answer, such as, and now you maintain your for fracking. What fracking programs would you approve in Pennsylvania? How much fracking would you approve? When would they start? How many years would they go for? The kinds of things where she will be floored by those questions because she can't possibly answer them. And then pivot to an attack against her, but that is not seen as a personal attack, and the language used is not personal. It's seen as clinical. For example, after he says, the reason why you have a flip-flopped about your position on fracking, and then told CNN you had that position in 2020, they fact-checked and said that wasn't the case, is because you want to carry Pennsylvania. It's a battleground state, and it's pivotal for you to try to get elected. Now, if you wanted to carry Pennsylvania, you should have selected Governor Shapiro to be your running mate. But the media, and not just one media, but numerous columnists and numerous commentators, including CNN, speculated you didn't do it because the man is Jewish. There. Now, the fact is you picked a governor who's more radical than you, and your two-state solution to the Middle East is Minnesota and Michigan. You're compromising the national security and foreign policy of the United States for political reasons. So that's the way you put a lot of stuff there, and then you're forcing the moderators to turn to her for a response that she's going to have problems doing with. So these are, some of the kinds of things I'd like to see. And, of course, in the real world, while we're doing this interview, and yesterday and 2 days ago and the rest of today and tomorrow, a lot of stuff should be thrown at her so she walks in the debate on defense. So I'm still hoping that maybe they're going to come out with some good, solid attacks by surrogates or President Trump or information leaked that when she's walking into that debate, she's already feeling tension and stress because she's going to have to respond to something that's contemporary in real time within the last 48 hours of the debate.
Yeah, I think her largest single problem is how do you present yourself as a change agent? How do you talk about, as she does, taking us in a new direction when she has been up front in the administration that brought us to where we are today with the highest gas prices in recent history, with epic inflation, with rising crime, a fentanyl epidemic, and on the verge of World War III in 2 different theaters. How does she just walk away and say, "Oh, well, that was Joe Biden's fault"? I don't know how she gets away with that.
Yeah, and this is the point I raised in the column. Is I think this is such a blatant, obvious issue that he must confront it directly and state that in less technical terms than you and I have been involved in campaigns. Simply to say, you're trying to do a magic act here. You're a chameleon. You're trying to turn the tables, and you basically are the surrogate here for President Biden. The reason he's not running is the power brokers, the Democratic Party, ran him out of the race within 48 hours of his saying to do it. They pushed you in. They claim to be there for democracy. But the fact of the matter is that you were the first to drop out 4 years ago. You didn't get a single delegate. You didn't have an open convention now. And they're trying to redo reality there. And we're doing the movie here. We're doing the Kamala Harris movie, and the voters are not going to go to the movies, and they're not going to buy these the tickets to this movie there. You are continuation of the same and worse, and then he needs to get into the economy very boldly and tie them both to the cost of living.
One of the things you say in your very perceptive memo, which you can find at the American Spectator, is that this is the year that the vice presidential debate could actually matter. Expand on that.
Yes. Well, most times in recent political history, although there's been a lot of talk, it turns out that generally the vice presidential nominee is sort of a neutral, neither a positive nor a negative. They're just there. And it's more of a risk-averse situation. The presidential nominee picks somebody that he thinks won't do any harm, like the Hippocratic oath of politics there. But the fact of the matter is that I truly believe, not because I would prefer Trump over her, I truly believe she made an error in picking this guy. I think he comes across as a snake oil salesman. They're thinking, well, here's this guy who's supposed to coach, the guy who's in the National Guard, he's from Middle America, and so on. And I think their analysis is wrong. I think that, when I saw him the other day, and hopefully Vance will bring this up, where he was at the fair answering all kinds of questions, and somebody said to him, a reporter asked him, well, what about the hostages that were just killed in Israel, the American? And he just turned away and walked away. I can understand somebody briefing a candidate and saying, stay away from policy. We're still working on things there. Don't do anything controversial. But the fact is, what President Trump should say is, you have no heart. You have no soul there about her choice of the vice president there. And this is what Vance should say. You couldn't even, when you were asked about an American citizen who was murdered in cold blood, you couldn't just come up to a microphone and say, I'm so distressed. I'm so sad. I'm so moved by the fact that we have lost an American and so on there. And where Vance has to basically say that this guy has no humanity. And many of these conservatives and Republicans fail to connect emotionally, just like their advertising doesn't. So I feel this guy is very vulnerable, and I think some of his lies are so visceral. For example, the drunk driving situation where the guy's going 95 miles per hour in a 45 or 50 zone, doesn't pass the sobriety test, doesn't pass the blood test, is put in jail, and then his campaign says it was all a misunderstanding there. People can relate to that, and what Vance has to say is, we all make mistakes, we all admit mistakes, and years later you said it there, but there's something wrong with your integrity when you can do this sort of thing. There's something wrong when you say you were in a war carrying the weapons of war, and you say it was a grammatical mistake.
All right, we have to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with Republican strategist extraordinaire Arnie Steinberg.
This is the Roger Stone Show.
Mic check. 1, 2. Are we recording? Hi, I'm Michelle Bernstein, an award-winning chef, restaurateur, and mom. I have a lot on my plate, including my psoriatic arthritis symptoms. That's why I was prescribed Cosentyx. It helps me move better.
Cosentyx secukinumab is prescribed for people 2 years of age and older with active psoriatic arthritis. Don't use if you're allergic to Cosentyx. Before starting, get checked for tuberculosis. An increased risk of infections and lowered ability to fight them may occur, like tuberculosis or other serious bacterial, fungal, or viral infections. Some were fatal. Tell your doctor if you have an infection or symptoms like fevers, sweats, chills, muscle aches, or cough, had a vaccine or plan to, or if inflammatory bowel disease symptoms develop or worsen. Serious allergic reactions and severe eczema-like skin reactions may occur. Learn more at 1-844-COSENTYX or Cosentyx.com.
Ask your rheumatologist about Cosentyx.
This is the Roger Stone Show.
Welcome back. This is the Roger Stone Show, and we're talking to Arnie Steinberg, to my mind, one of the most brilliant and creative Republican strategists in the country today. We're longtime friends, at full disclosure. He's the author of Whiplash, From JFK to Donald Trump, and we're talking about what could be the most consequential presidential debate in American history coming up Tuesday night. He's written a brilliant memo to President Trump as a public document at the American Spectator. Let us continue. One of the things that I really agree with here in your memo, Arnie, is that the president must avoid making what appears to be personal attacks on his opponent. Pointing out
he should attack her in a way that seems comparative and then always in a positive way, looking toward the future. And he should turn everything around. You know, you say you're from the politics of joy. You say you're from the politics of joy, and you know what's joyful about the cost of living? What's joyful about all the migrants coming in and disrupting public services there? And you know what he needs to say is that some people say, Madam Vice President, that we should ask the question: are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? Pretty much everybody knows they're worse off. I'm going to ask another question. I'm going to say to you that the people who voted for Donald Trump in 2016 and 2020 would vote for Donald Trump again. The people who voted for Joe Biden, who you say was this consequential, wonderful president there, he had a tremendous rate of desertion, voters who felt that they were screwed over there. And so my question is, for the people watching, if you vote for Donald Trump or you vote for Kamala Harris, who's going to have buyer's remorse after this election? Who's going to look back and say, my God, I voted on an untested Kamala Harris who was basically slavish to Joe Biden, said Bidenomics was terrific there. But when we know there's a direct line between the Biden-Harris economic policies and the massive, unprecedented increase in the cost of living, that's a permanent increase in the cost of living there. If you say inflation is going down, we're not going to return to the prior price level. You have destroyed the feeling of parents that the expectations that their children will have a better life. And as President of the United States, I'm going to have a tremendous, challenging undertaking to reverse the angst and anxiety and stress and tension in our country that you and Joe Biden have caused.
Let me ask you this, Arnie. Do you think it is a legitimate issue for the debate and for the campaign that the day after Donald Trump's debate with Joe Biden, in which I thought Trump was extraordinarily disciplined, lived within disadvantageous rules for him, stuck to his hammering of Biden on his record, do you think it is a legitimate issue that the day after the debate, Kamala Harris was telling us that Joe Biden was sharp as a tack and he just had an off night?
Absolutely. I think he needs to turn it into credibility and say this was a bait and switch situation there. And you're the same person who was saying this person is consequential. He's a genius behind closed doors. And we all know that under my administration we had peace and prosperity, and under this administration we have war and economic disaster. And everybody on television, do they believe what they see or do they believe what you told them, Kamala, there? And how is it that things switch so quickly? I think it's legitimate because people have to feel they can trust the chief executive of this country there, and you have come to this nomination under the most questionable circumstances.
This is going to be very interesting. Do you think we'll have more than one debate?
I think it's going to depend on the outcome. I think if she doesn't do well, she may ask for another debate. And I don't know what former President Trump's strategy is on this. I hope he can score some home runs. I mean, I hope he can say, you know, you claim to be a prosecutor. A prosecutor doesn't prosecute. A prosecutor seeks.
All right, we have a hard out, unfortunately. I want to thank my friend, Arnie Steinberg. God bless you, my friend. I'm Roger Stone. We'll be right back.